his beatitude said, when you teach theology and it's separated from our ascetical tradition and practice in orthodoxy, theology quickly becomes a weapon. So he said it's impossible to teach Orthodox theology apart from the ascetical exercises and tradition. And for me, that sums up exactly the kind of model that I want to see here.
Yeah. Thank you, Father Chad, for agreeing to sit down with me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's nice having you here finally.
Yes.
We'll have lots to talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. So the first question is very kind of broad and basic about St. Vladimir's seminary, how it came to be 1939?
38.
38.
Actually, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I'd like to answer you by actually taking it back a little further. The whole history of Orthodox seminaries in North America. As you know, I used to be the dean of St. Herman's Seminary in Kodiak, and when I was in Alaska, I was blessed to actually serve in the chapel of what's called the Russian Bishop's House in what's now Sitka. It was New Archangel. The church doesn't own that property anymore. It's in the National Park Service, but they're very generous to let us use that chapel with the censer and other things that were St. Innocent's. But in that big complex, there is the first seminary in North America. And it's fascinating when you read the curriculum. Like, I was like a little puzzled when I saw that hygiene was a big part of the original curriculum. But when you think about a seminary in a missionary situation in those dates, yes, they needed to know how to treat injuries and other such things. And, you know, just to be able to sit in that room, as I was able to do, you could sense that this was a place of prayer, a place of education, and it's where I really was impressed as someone who continues to work in priestly formation in a seminary context. St. Innocent reminded everyone that in order for Orthodoxy to thrive in this new cultural environment, you needed to do three things, and you needed to recruit men for the priesthood from the local population. Second, he said they needed to be educated in a local seminary, not sending them abroad. And third, he said we need to learn to teach and preach in the language that the people understand. And that was our model. It's still an excellent model. I think that particularly the third point has been expanded beyond speaking a particular language, because we just had to learn to communicate in varieties of ways that social media challenges us, the generational differences challenge us. But eventually the seminary was moved to Minnesota, and we actually have a brick outside the bookstore here that was salvaged from that original building. It was then relocated to Tenafly, New Jersey. And then along comes the Bolshevik Revolution, and no longer is there, the Tsar's purse and other such things to support the institutions. So we had a very dry period between the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917, 1918, through the founding of two seminaries, which I'll get to in 1938. It's very interesting there in that period between 1917 and 1938. Some American Orthodox were trained abroad, but many went to Anglican seminaries, in particular Nashotah House, the Anglo-Catholic seminary in Wisconsin that I know very well. And at the seminary, there's quite a large icon of the three hierarchs. And when you read the inscription on the back, it was given by the Orthodox students in the graduating class of 1928. So I have a deal with the folks at Nashotah House that if for some reason they go under, we get that icon. So in 1938, the Metropolia, when you read the founding documents, the exchanges of the time as they came to make those decisions about reconstituting institutions to move us forward in priestly formation, theological education, The documents say something that I think is so significant. The bishops knew that America would become a highly educated society, and therefore we needed a highly educated clergy in order to present orthodoxy in that particular context. That's really quite visionary. So they used the Russian model, and they founded two schools, St. Tikhon's, outside the monastery in South Canaan, Pennsylvania. They used what was called in the Russian tradition the pastoral school model. It was not to be a school of higher education, but it was to be a place, kind of like an extended high school, where men would be taught the rubrics and chanting and formed for pastoral ministry that way. There was also the Russian model for the academy, and that's what they said that their hopes for St. Vladimir's would be. There were only a handful of academies in the Russian tradition. There was Moscow, the Kiev Academy, St. Petersburg, Kazan. We actually achieved that status in 1948. And we used to use the term St. Vladimir's Academy, but in American English it took a different turn, and so these days people don't understand academy as versus the word seminary. We talk about Little Lamb's Academy or something like that. So when I'm abroad, I have to make sure that I explain that to everyone, because abroad, seminary basically means more or less a high school education. I think the root word for seminary, is very fascinating, because it's connected to Seminole and the garden and the place where you plant the seed like in a greenhouse and grow it up to full maturity. And that's really what we do here. Mm-hmm. So that's the early history of St. Vladimir's. Would you like me to take it a little further?
Sure, yeah.
So when you look at our history, we had a period of time when we were at General, the Episcopalian seminary down in the city. We then went to Union Seminary for a period of time. Incredible stories about those days. Prominent theologians, arriving from, say, St. Serge in Paris, discovered that, in this apartment we also have 3 seminarians in addition to that academic and his family. The library was so thin that they actually used an old bathroom that was adequate. And I'm also told that, there were books that were sort of stored in the old bathtub that were there. So we've come a long ways. We then had an association with Columbia University, which was quite nice because it meant that you could get a dual degree, because we became the institution for higher education, which means that you must have your undergraduate, your baccalaureate degree to apply for graduate work here. And then in 1962, we purchased the property in Crestwood/Yonkers, New York. It was St. Eleanor's Convent, which had been a home for unwed mothers. There was the main building, which is now called Jermac, and a small Roman Catholic chapel, and that's how we began in 1962. Of course, great figures, names associated with St. Vladimir's. I often reference people when they ask me the question you've asked about the history of St. Vladimir's. A book that was edited by Paul Gavriluk, titled On Christian Leadership. It's published by SVS Press. It documents the exchange and the tensions between Father George Florovsky and Father Alexander Schmemann. And to basically sort of give you the Reader's Digest condensed version of that exchange, it was pretty clear that Florovsky saw St. Vladimir's becoming very much in the image of Harvard or Princeton, that it would be at that sort of level of academic rigor and studies. Schmemann's vision was more, yes, a high academic bar, but essential pastoral formation, especially for priestly ministry. And Schmemann tagged into some of the conversation of the founding in 1938. The bishop said that this institution needed to be missional. The one organization that was really engaging the American culture and presenting orthodoxy within that cultural context. And that's why they chose St. Vladimir as the patron, because 1938 was the 950th anniversary of the baptism of the Rus. And so they said the school needed a missional patron. So Schmemann picks up on that. And in the end, those tensions, it was Schmemann who prevailed, although he was much younger than Florovsky, but it was his vision of a place of yes, as I said, high academic standing, but formation into pastoral ministry. Schmemann, borrowing from St. Basil the Great, said that the seminary needed to know three paths: to the chapel, to the classroom, and to the library. And that really is the kind of balance that we were built upon. And then, continuing that legacy down through, you had, Father John Meyendorff, again with a strong academic emphasis here, association with Fordham University. Then the Hopko era, and of course Father Hopko was the pastor par excellence. I understand still the most popular voice heard on Ancient Faith Radio as a podcaster.
I believe it.
So he brought another kind of balance and things, very much like his father-in-law, Father Alexander. Then passing through the time of John Erickson, a former church history professor, and arriving at the double-headed eagle, the period where I was the chancellor, Father John Baer was dean. And in 2016, the board again made another decision, which was to sort of align the governance model of St. Vladimir's with what I would say 85% of the other accredited seminaries in North America follow, which is the model of a president and then his direct reports, including an academic dean and others. And that's, again, it's part of keeping pace with just the demands of modern times, because things have changed so rapidly. The Master of Divinity degree, which is one of the degrees we offer here, it's the normal ordination track degree. You can imagine how it's had to be sort of reinvented almost every year to keep pace with the challenges of the 21st century.
Yeah. So, for by way of clarification, the genesis of St. Vladimir's was in Kodiak, and then they moved from there to Minnesota.
Actually, in Sitka.
In Sitka.
That was the first Orthodox seminary for North America.
Okay.
I'd say actually, if there's such a genesis for St. Vladimir's, it would be Saint Serge in Paris, because after the Bolshevik Revolution, there was the what would we call it, the sort of Parisian school that developed there, and that's where Florovsky, Schmemann, Meyendorff, they all came out of that collection of great Russian minds and figures and people, and it was transferred here.
Yeah. Okay. And what was the seminary named in Sitka?
In Sitka, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was probably New Archangel, just like the town.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until later, 1938, that it was made St. Vladimir's.
Yes, the one in Tenafly, New Jersey, was St. Platon.
A follow-up question, which I think you more or less touched on, was has the mission of St. Vladimir's changed, or in what ways? You talked about the modern challenges.
Well, Herman, I teach a course in parish administration to the seniors, their last semester here, and I have to alter it every single year because things are changing that rapidly. For instance, just take the field of biomedicine and bioethics. We're forming priests and pastors here for the large part. We have other degree programs and other tracks. But again, part of my many hats that I wear here is I am the Master of Divinity degree program director. So I've already decided that next year I want to move towards another required course in biomedicine, bioethics, because pastors have to know these things. What are you going to do when you're a priest standing with a family and say their 16-year-old child has been in an auto accident, he's been on life support, and the hospital team is directing that it's probably time to take that person off life support, and they turn to the priest and say, so what's the Orthodox Church's position on hydration? And I mean, if the young priest looks befuddled, like what kind of question is that? That won't do. So that's one of the huge challenges, is just keeping pace with the complexities of the 21st century. Combine that with the fact that I am now receiving the most indebted generation of Americans in our history, indebted from their undergraduate degrees. So we work so hard here to get our graduates out as debt-free as possible, including what is now a 9-year-old tuition initiative that will, out of our endowment, cover 50%. If they're then able to find 25% from their bishop, their diocese, a ladies group, something that's ecclesial, not their favorite uncle, we'll match the other 25%. And just this last year, Herman, we actually, out of our endowment, awarded $588,000 in scholarship. So we're doing our part, that's for sure. So there's that kind of challenge, and we don't take the financial challenge lightly, because that's what goes on into the field. Once our graduates are there, we need to be able to have them free enough that they can work in planting a new mission, or reviving a dying parish, or in some form of team ministry, or a different ministry out of the parish altogether. Like I now have women who are here for the Master of Divinity degree, because we're the only seminary that requires clinical pastoral education. That's another part of how things have changed. We're the only Orthodox seminary that requires CPE. And again, that's part of pastoral formation. You can be the most brilliant academic ever to graduate, but if you can't pastorally deal with the dying and families who are grieving, or someone who's facing major surgery or something like that, you're probably in the wrong place. Yeah. So women can actually find ready employment now, Orthodox lay women, in hospital chaplaincy. So that's another expansion of the degree program here. Keeping pace beyond the MDiv, we offer the Master of Arts degree. We've got this special relationship now with our own Sacred Arts Institute, which is remarkable. Like this semester, we have Alex Lingus as visiting faculty. Last semester, we had George Cordes, the iconographer. Capella Romana will be offering a concert next Friday evening. This is a way of, just sort of broadening the palette, so to speak. So students have such a broad experience here. But we also have the Master of Theology, the MTH. That's really directed by our academic dean, Dr. Alex Todoria. Many of our students have used that as sort of the precursor to following up with a possible PhD or THD. That's how to test the waters. And I believe I'm correct when I say that I don't believe any of our MTH, THM graduates who've desired to do doctoral work have ever not found admission somewhere. We also have reconstituted the Doctor of Ministry program, which is a hybrid. That means 51% is on campus. That's an intensive week. The rest of it's done online. And we hope to be able to launch a Master of Arts degree online as well in Christian leadership and in some other areas, because that's part of our vision for the future, how we better deliver on online hybrid courses. And then I'm going to let you in on a secret. With, again, Dr. Todoria's leadership, we've been working towards the possibility of offering the PhD as part of our degree program. We've done well. We're not there yet. We've got to pass through some final things with the state of New York, but stay tuned. I think we're going to have a nice positive announcement about that probably at the May Board of Trustees meeting.
Excellent. Next question was regarding the announcement about the change in campus. And as I understand it, and I can imagine will be a challenging undertaking for a variety of reasons. So I wonder if you could talk about the impetus behind the decision, and maybe some of the challenges, and then a vision for the future.
Well, Herman, I'm very pleased to be asked about this. we did, it had been almost 3 years since we actually announced that Board of Trustees agrees that we're not in the best location for the future of the seminary. We're landlocked here. We've looked at different things over the years. I would say this just for the record. The first attempt to bring St. Tikhon's and St. Vladimir's together as one institution was 1940. That's only 2 years after their founding. Since then, there have been various attempts to bring the two schools together. And the reason for that is it's just not good stewardship trying to support two theological institutions 2 hours apart in the Northeast. That's the bottom line there. So over the years, there have been several attempts to do this, all of them not working. There was a famous 1994 study report by the OCA Synod. That's a document worth reading if anybody's really interested in this, which also made the recommendation then the two schools be brought together. In 2016, and by the way, Paul Garverlook documents this, he footnotes it in the book I mentioned on Christian leadership. In 2016, a very generous Antiochian donor put $1 million on the table and said, I'm tired of supporting two schools 2 hours apart in the Northeast. Get an outside facilitator, someone to come in, do an analysis, and give a report. Our board was very enthusiastic, unanimously supported that idea. It didn't go forward, and so that $1 million was given elsewhere. But I think that's really probably, again, for the historical record, I think that that's the marker for us in which we finally said, then we have to do what we have to do to take full fiduciary responsibility for this institution, which, Herman, I say this with as much humility as I can possibly muster. St. Vladimir's is an institution of global respect. It's been a school that other schools have tried to model from. You just take the impact of the scholarship here, SVS Press. How do you measure it? It's huge. In fact, we were all just recently, many of us, at the International Orthodox Theological Association gathering in Greece. And I can tell you, again, in all honesty, no theological institution in the Orthodox world had a bigger footprint than St. Vladimir's. So we have to be responsible about things here. And we are probably in the most expensive county in the United States. New York was once the kind of epicenter for all things Orthodox. That's not the case. I'm not the first administrator of the seminary to make this kind of recommendation. It goes back a long ways. In fact, Father Tom Hopko had his eye on Indianapolis at one point. So I'm not the first, but I am the one who went to the Board of Trustees and said, well, we basically have a decision to make. There are three things. We can do nothing, just sort of maintain the status quo. Here's a statistic for you, and this ought to sober up everybody who's listening. Since 2009, 70 ATS seminaries, and I'm not talking Orthodox, I'm talking what were the 300 plus schools in Canada and in the US accredited by the Association for Theological Schools. 70 have been forced to close or merge in order to survive. The Lilly Foundation put the Pathways for Tomorrow grants available to ATS schools. Why? Because they recognize the two models that we have, the embedded one in the university or the standalone like St. Vladimir's. Neither model is working well. So Lilly was basically saying, give us model 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so we've actually come up with such a model. And Lilly is standing with us. We in fact have two $1 million grants from Lilly. One is the Pathways to Tomorrow. They came back knocking on our door about the compelling preaching. Now, again, when your hearers hear this, it's like, well, that doesn't mean that we're, swimming in a pool of gold here. Those are restricted funds. They don't impact the bottom line. And that's where we have found it really impossible to sort of keep up with deferred maintenance and all the rest. We're a unique seminary in that we have 4 revenue streams. We have the normal kind of tuition revenue. We have the sort of generosity of the faithful. We have our endowment, but we also have SVS Press. And SVS Press is the only press amongst the ATS schools that's not subsidized that makes a profit. And we make a very fine profit, and all of that goes to support the seminarians and our future priests. So we did the analysis, and as I said, there were three choices: stay here and do nothing. And I guarantee you, in a period of time, there'll be a for sale sign out in front, but it's not because we're moving. Large seminaries, Gordon Conwell is one of the most recent ones to announce. General Seminary had an incoming class of 2, and so they're in negotiation with Virginia Seminary. This is happening all over, but we Orthodox have a hard time talking without passions flaring about theological education. And I think, unfortunately, we're also seeing pastoral schools, other such things pop up all over the country. Again, not everybody's going to like what I'm about to say, but for me, that's a dumbing down process that won't serve us well as we get deeper into, as I said, the complexities of the 21st century. So we had option B. Option B was to revamp this campus. The estimated cost was $100 million to make all of this, modern and efficient. I'll give you an example. I had to replace 2 floors of bathrooms in the Germac building, a single men's dorm. Cost me $100,000. Well, that's the Lord's money, but I think we can do other things than that. $80,000 boiler in the Leonti room, in classrooms that are just simply unusable for us in the modern context. So we did a deep think, a deep analysis. How can we best serve the church in the 21st century? And much of that centered around what I think is very exciting, and I think it's exciting for you too, which is the whole concept of Orthodox education in North America. And I'm talking about from preschool right on up through graduate level. We have to take responsibility for our children's education. And we're seeing this all over the country. Homeschool academies, the rise of Orthodox classical schools, it's remarkable. So we've done our initial work. We hope to have a campus in a more affordable part of the country that will allow us to basically have a kind of 2-track. We aren't going to abandon training priests for a screen. It has to be residential with all of the give and take of living in community, including community service, all the rest. Washing dishes and taking out the trash is as important in priestly formation as a course on Dionysius the Areopagite. That's just a fact. So we'd like to be able to have up to 200 students in terms of residential, to have a faculty for whom that's their particular pedagogy, the life and rhythm of daily life, the give and take in residential life. Over here, we'd have a different track, which is the online hybrid. People have said, well, how many students? And I said, well, the sky's the limit, and the demand is very great. Everything from, I listened to this recorded 1 lecture presentation by a faculty member, yes, to actually offering degrees. So we have that, but this is something that I think is very exciting. And this is option C that we've gone for, to actually be able to build a modern 21st century campus that allows for the proper way in which single people live today, and for married students, but also to be able to provide an expansion for SVS Press. We can't do it here, and we're behind. We're receiving the OCA archives, so a very modern library, archivist, places where faculty from all over the world can come spend their sabbaticals or do short periods of research. Continuing education, a place for renewal for priests and others, but also a kind of theological epicenter for conversation about education. So our architectural model has a place at the end for an Orthodox classical school, K through 12. So our seminary kids can have access to it, but the public can also come in from the other side. What about an undergraduate program? Well, we've had some conversation with another entity. I won't name them because we're not at that point. But it could be that the actual physical campus for an undergraduate program could be also located on our campus. Not that it's our program, it would remain another institution's program, but it would be physically on our campus.
Share facilities, library.
Exactly. And you just said something that's so key. Shared facilities. We have got to get smart about our stewardship. We should have premier excellence and not spreading things so thin all the time and just barely getting by, as we Orthodox unfortunately have a tendency to do.
Yeah.
There, I'm controversial again.
That's good. It's good for the clicks online.
Exactly. Well, I have said this many times. For me, one of the reasons we're thinking the way that we're thinking is it's a saying from Wayne Gretzky, the famous hockey player. He said, you need to skate to where the hockey puck is going, not to where the hockey puck is. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
We're trying to actually think and get ahead of the game.
Yeah.
This sort of living hand to mouth, the way that we've had to do for so long,
Yeah.
that's not going to do it.
Yeah. And if you hit it right, and it does seem like wise for what it's worth, to my thinking, then it will attract all the right, it'll attract, God will provide the finances because people will see the wisdom in it. And
Well, Herman, I have said this in many places. We're living in dark times, and our Orthodox people need to see a very bright light.
yeah,
And in my opinion, I think what we're trying to do is the biggest thing since autocephaly.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's important. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Cool. Glory to God. We'll keep praying.
Yeah. Well, any of that.
How does the Father Alexander lecture fit into the mission, general mission of St. Vladimir's, the work that you do?
Okay. Well, Herman, as you know, that this is the 40th anniversary this year of the annual Schmemann Lecture. I think that in the early days of the lecture series, it was really formed to sort of memorialize Alexander Schmemann and his work. And in many senses, that continues. Many of the speakers over the years have been people that were addressing a specific aspect of Father Alexander's teaching. And by the way, it's not limited to liturgical things. He had a much, much wider palette. And you want to talk about, his involvement in things like the Hartford Declaration. Go back and read it. He was a person who understood that secularism was rising and having a very negative impact. I'm actually the author of two chapters in two publications. One of them is the honoring the Patriarch of Romania, Patriarch Daniel's 70th birthday, where I pick up on Schmemann's teaching as the Eucharist is an antidote to secularism. So he didn't hold back in his day, neither should we. So that's another aspect of understanding Father Schmemann. I'm on public record saying, I actually tire of people who are trying to reinvent Father Alexander into something he was not. Let Father Alexander speak for himself. And this is why we've digitized his the tape recordings that we have of him, so people can hear his voice. So the Schmemann Lecture, should sort of carry on the various aspects of Father Alexander. There are a few occasions in recent times in which we've picked up on a particular theme that was happening. Bishop Nicholas speaking about St. Raphael of Brooklyn. But that allowed, again, a teaching, a reminder that was a joint effort between the Antiochian Archdiocese and the Orthodox Church in America. And think about Father Alexander's influence in autocephaly and the whole birthing process of the OCA. And that's not a dead issue. Maybe the most troubling aspect about Orthodoxy in North America, in my opinion, and that's shared by many, is our divided house. We can't make a proper evangelistic presentation of our faith when we look like tribes, and not only tribes, tribes that don't even like each other. So this has been addressed over the years, and no one can underestimate Father Alexander's ecumenical influence. Does that mean that he's compromised Orthodoxy in some way? Absolutely not. And we're fully aware that there was a period where people were burning Father Alexander Schmemann's books, in post-communist, Bulgaria or wherever it happened to be. Well, that's where they are. We're at a different place. So it's important to keep his voice out there to be heard. There was a wonderful fate shrift published a few years ago, and it's maybe a little bit embarrassing, but it was not put together by an Orthodox person. It was put together by a traditionalist Anglican who had great devotion, through David Fagerberg, who's a professor at Notre Dame, and probably the best Schmemann scholar standing today, I would say. He introduced me to a community of Norbertine canonesses in California who are totally devoted to Father Alexander Schmemann. They bought every Roman Catholic bishop a copy of his book, The Eucharist, prior to their convocation this past year on the place of the Eucharist. So, I mean, that's a normal thing to hear from these people. And we've had other, non-Orthodox speakers here. Over the years, they're always addressing some aspect of Father Schmemann. We had a Maronite professor from Notre Dame last year. This year, we were really quite blessed to have Professor Hans Boersma, who, if you're paying attention, is like a hot number. Everyone from Mennonites to Orthodox want to hear his voice, and all you have to do is listen to him, and you see, yes, he's speaking our language, and that's an important part of the Orthodox witness. I have always, again, this is very personal with me. I really do believe that we're living in a time in which there is a realignment of Christendom that crosses denominational lines. I'll go right on record right here as well. We had, leading our Lenten retreat a few years back, a wonderful traditionalist Anglican nun. And she had done her work on theosis in one of her advanced degrees. Father Tom Hopko, by the way, happened to have been the priest leading her novitiate because their convent was nearby here. So, I mean, imagine that. I mean, that's how close things were, that Father Tom was her novice master. Amazing. So I had her speak here. This community of nuns was very serious looking at Orthodoxy, coming as a community. But the nasties, on social media afterwards, they saw it. And they really came to the understanding of, well, maybe we're not welcome in this house. Well, what is a tragedy of that? And this institution stands on the work of Father Florowski, Father Schmemann, Father Meindorf, right down the line. We have always been there, always engaging. And if those folks would like to push me a little harder, I'll quote back to them St. Tikhon, our Archbishop here in North America. And again, I'll go on record, not everybody will agree with me, but I believe he was our last bishop who really saw himself as the Archbishop of North America. He thought all North Americans were part of his flock. He carried himself as, I am the Archbishop of North America. And he was very critical of people who criticized him for his outreach to non-Orthodox, because the response was only an insecure Orthodox would be afraid to reach a hand of friendship to another Christian. So this is why we do these things. Rod Dreher, again, he was selected, not by decree, but by analysis, critique. His book, Live Not by Lies, dovetails so nicely with the double volume series that we were publishing with Father Alexander Schmemann's Radio Free Europe broadcast in the former Soviet Union. It dovetailed absolutely perfectly. And it showed actually the influence of Father Schmemann's voice at the time. And remember, Father Schmemann had no idea whether they were hearing him or not on the other side. He had no way of knowing. Yet he faithfully would go down and make those recordings. So Rod Dreher, who's certainly well known in many circles, a published author. He's probably sold more books than any of our former speakers. Yes, not everybody may be in alignment with this or that or whatever it is that he teaches or says, but that's also part of a liberal education, which we try to provide here. Oh, I just used the L word. I use that in the classical British way of, yes, this is a place of exchange and ideas. And it's critical now in our American cultural context. We try, and I think we, for the most part, succeed, try to maintain what we've lost culturally, which is the ability to have a civil conversation with somebody who may not be fully in alignment with your own thoughts. All of that with keeping within the bounds of our Orthodox Christian tradition.
Yeah.
Well, Herman, I have mentioned SVS Press, which continues to be strong. It's still the largest English language Orthodox press in the world. We do a nice partnership with Ancient Faith Ministries. Sometimes we'll receive a manuscript and we'll say, well, that's not quite our genre, but Ancient Faith, and vice versa. But we are working with them on, I think, a very exciting new initiative to bring about Spanish language translations and Mandarin Chinese translations. So we're doing that jointly. We also have our own project going with Portuguese. And we've done work with Mother Barbara at Holy Nativity of Our Lord Monastery in Kemp, Texas. She's a Brazilian, and she actually came to us with a proposal. And it's very exciting, and we're actually at a point where that's close to going to the printer. And also with the support of the Orthodox Vision Foundation, OVF, we're doing audiobooks. And that's taken off really well. Everywhere I go when I'm traveling, people tell me they're listening to the audiobooks. And as I mentioned earlier, we also with assistance from the Farah Foundation, we were able to do the digitization of tapes that were actually, we were losing them.
Mm-hmm.
So we almost got there right in the nick of time
Thanks
for
to
several
God.
of them.
Yeah.
And some of them are not the best of quality because the tapes weren't great, but at least we've got them preserved. Another initiative is our library, and because we're looking seriously at expansion, at relocation, but we had to do updates. So thank God again from a generous donor, we were able to do that. So everything is barcoded. The students now have access to the library 24/7 with self-checkout. The Orthodox libraries are a conversation. There are people who are saying, oh, you can just go online or whatever else. But I think maybe in medicine or law, that's okay. But in theology, we need these books. And it needs to be, the kind of space where a student can come and spend a lot of time and a lot of hours in a comfortable way. So that's another initiative, is keeping pace with changes in that arena. We've been rebuilding the faculty here, which is very, very exciting. We have some remarkable new faculty, and some of the more senior faculty are coming up with new ideas and new initiatives as well. So it's a nice cross-pollination of old and new. This again is something that's been well received by ATS. And as I said earlier, when we get to the actual expansion of the seminary, that means, continuing on that path of expanding our faculty. The next kind of initiative, I think that's very significant, comes from the two Lilly grants. One, Pathways for Tomorrow, will involve a better seminary influence, input, resources with training permanent deacons. But this may be the most exciting one, at least from my perspective, which is so many of our graduates and other priests have been reporting to us that they have very large groups of catechumens. And we all know, and we can all thank God, that we are seeing more inquirers, more seekers in our Orthodox communities, small and large, new missions to old established parishes. I had a conversation with a woman in an urban, not so thriving parish, But she was so excited. She said, Father Chad, we've got a catechumen. You know, it was one. But it was so exciting because it was inspiring others who were sort of locked into the mentality that, well, we're on our way out.
Yeah.
There are priests who have over 100 catechumens
My goodness.
in their community. So some of them have been saying, you know, we need some help. So we want to provide the resources, and we're working on that. Father John Parker did his Doctor of Ministry with us. I was actually his first reader. And he did a study of what preparing catechumens looks like. And it's everything from, oh, come and have a cup of coffee with me on Saturday morning and we'll grease you up on Sunday, to 2-year programs, and everything in between. So we're trying to get some universality about, you know, what that will look like, trying to touch base and communicate with other entities that are working on this independently. But part of this will be actually be able to certify lay catechists. So it really is a kind of bringing back into the Orthodox world the standing of catechists as a ministry in the church. The compelling ministry work that we're doing, I think, can basically be summed up like this. The Lilly Foundation recognizes that preachers used to have a very significant impact in American culture and society. And just look, I mean, movements like, you know, slavery, the civil rights movement, even matters environmental, have had a strong push, you know, from preachers. And they recognize that they don't have that standing anymore. I mean, stop and think, who is the great preacher in American society at the moment? So they actually came and knocked on our door, and asked, and so we went through the process, and we did receive, again, a second $1 million grant. So we're working on the process of improving preaching in the Orthodox Church, not only with our students, but as something for priests who have been in the field for many, many years. We received in a survey a lot of response saying, you know, I've been in the parish for 25 plus years. My preaching is getting dry, and I need new resources.
Yeah.
So we're responding in that way. Other initiatives, I think, also have to do with our student body. We are intentionally very pan-Orthodox. We've had students from as many as 19 countries. About 1/4 of our students now are from Oriental Orthodox traditions, and that is something for which we are like firm about, that we expect to be the center in the next few years for reviving the dialogue between Eastern and Oriental Orthodox. That's been languishing. And when you look around the world, what other Orthodox institution is there that actually pulled that off other than this one? And I don't say that in any sense of arrogance, it's just kind of a fact. So that in itself, I think, is another very exciting initiative. And we don't apologize for that. Sometimes, Herman, I get a little tired of comments I receive from people, which is like, well, you know, you're raising a lot of money for Ugandans or Ukrainians or whatever. What about the Americans? Well, open your eyes, because we're doing, as I said earlier, everything we can to get our American students through here debt-free. So it's not an either or, it's all of the above.
Yeah. Was there something more about vocations?
Yes, I think I'm irresponsible if I don't say something about the vocation crisis. And it's not just us, it's across the board in different traditions. But we Orthodox are really suffering with a priestly vocation shortage. When you look at how many priests are working well past normal retirement age, that's not good for them, and it's not good for the parishes. But I can say this with some real thanksgiving. We've been encouraging people, St. Vladimir's, encouraging our donors and others to pray for vocations pretty strongly for the last 5 years, and we're beginning to see the Lord hears. We have a full house. I have, counting the students who are on extension from thesis, 101 students. That's remarkable for us. It's another reason why we're jam-packed here and don't have any room for expansion. But the Lord is hearing us. There is a difference in students now. Many of them are coming right through their first steps through the gate, with a recognition that they probably won't be put in a place that can afford full-time ministry. So they're prepared to leave here to be bivocational, what St. Paul might call a tent maker priest. But, not so very long ago, 25, 30 years ago, we could easily graduate students from here and they would get full-time jobs as youth ministers, full-time jobs as choir directors. There were other positions in the church. Those have largely disappeared. Parishes that used to be able to afford a second priest, which is a really good way to launch a newly ordained priest into pastoral ministry, that's getting thinner and thinner and thinner as well. So the vocations are there, and St. Vladimir's is being realistic about who we're preparing, and we need to be working with the various metropolis, archdiocese, dioceses on strategic planning so we know how to nourish them, prepare them, not just the priest, but if the candidate is married and with children, for if they're going to be put in, say, Wide Road, Montana, and there are 15 people there meeting in a garage, we need to prepare for that and find the support so we can make that work. And the same with dying urban parishes and all the rest. So we're very anxious to actually have conversation and work with the various groups that support us as part of our base. That's what we're here for. We're here to serve the church.
Yeah. Excellent. You were talking about the Lilly Grant for preaching.
Mm-hmm.
In 2019, I gave a talk at St. Tikhon's. They had this follow-up conference after the one at Jordanville.
Oh yeah,
Speaking of the truth
I spoke
out
at
loud.
the one in Jordanville.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there.
Father Schmemann, actually.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. And I interviewed Father Anthony Gilbert and Rod Dreher at that time and some other people. But 6 months later, they did the one at St. Tikhon's, and I gave a talk. And while I was there, they had the Willard preacher.
Oh yeah, from State College.
From State College,
Uh-huh.
and I was very impressed by him, and inspired in a lot of ways. And I thought, it seemed to me. I don't know if you've I would imagine that you've contemplated a class in rhetoric or how to speak to the culture, but to be able to do what he does is stand in front of, all sorts of people that don't care about what he's talking about, and he's obviously helped a lot of people kind of change their way of thinking or whatever, and. So yeah, I was wondering, have you contemplated doing rhetoric or something to help priests be able to engage?
We have a full-time professor of rhetoric and homiletics in Father Sergius Halverson.
Okay, so he does rhetoric as well.
He does.
Okay.
But I'd actually take this in a little different direction. What I said earlier about Saint Innocent,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's all about communication. So that's another aspect of how we've got to work into particularly the Master of Divinity degree. How do we communicate with people? And some of it is language, but it's all the various aspects of social media, and also dealing with. I actually spoke about this morning in my parish administration course. There are way too many priests who avoid teaching orthodoxy because it might be controversial.
Yeah.
I might lose a parishioner.
Right.
I might lose a pledge.
Right.
And so I told the students this morning, it's a disaster when the priest basically operates like the activities director on a cruise ship. Your parish is so busy with, English tea or blini dinner or something like that, and you think you're succeeding in ministry. But for the most part, that's why we're losing our young people.
Yeah.
Because cultural dance doesn't hold them.
Yeah.
And we're living in a very, very aggressive anti-Christian culture. And so we have got to get our apologetics down. If you read the St. Vladimir's vision, values, mission statement, Apologetics is in there a couple of times.
Mhm.
And when we changed it, there were some people who objected to that.
I remember I recently reread it actually on
Yeah.
the website, and I noted that you mentioned apologetics. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
and I was a bit dumbfounded by Orthodox people who really did not have any understanding of what that really means.
right.
It's like when I speak, say, in a parish, and I do less of this than I used to, but there was a time when I was a sort of hot ticket item to talk about evangelism, and Orthodox people would say, "Oh, you know, Father Chad, we don't proselytize," and it's like they didn't hear what was being said at all.
Right.
And I think that's another big challenge for us. Our people have to accept the fact that Caesar no longer protects us, and the DNA is not the way to transmit our Orthodox faith.
Yeah. 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 Could you talk about the St. Vladimir's Quarterly?
The St. Vladimir's Theological Quarterly, of course, again, was a kind of gold standard for many, many years, but it went into decline. And this was on my watch here. And I actually reached a point where I was prepared to kill it because we were losing money. And I had certain people inside and outside of St. Vladimir's who were like appalled when they heard that I was ready to put it on the chopping block. And I was told things like, well, a theological journal shouldn't be raising money anyway. You probably should be losing money. Well, that doesn't work. And, we had to think about content and other kinds of things. There is a recognition by the current faculty for sure that there's been shifts and changes in what people in Orthodoxy have a particular interest in at the moment. So with the enormous heft of Dr. Alex Todoria, our academic dean, he's taken that on. We now operate with an advisory with other faculty, Dr. Vitaly Permyakov, Deacon Vitaly, Father Bogdan Bucher. It is a double-blind peer review now. It underwent a facelift. It looks different. Content is different. This is one of the other things I hear sometimes, which is like, well, it's pretty heavily Romanian, and I'm going to answer that this way. Anybody who was paying attention to the Council of Crete recognized that it was often repeated that the best prepared theological delegation were the Romanians. And that's, again, it's another shift that we have. So it isn't that I just happen to have a Romanian academic dean or a Romanian patristics professor. It is the fact that the Romanians have really taken theological education very seriously. I edited the first English language book about Patriarch Daniel of Romania. And in a private session with him that was supposed to last 10 minutes, and I believe it went on for an hour and 10 minutes, he said something to me, which again is a kind of inspiration for what I do here. He basically was saying to me, theological education is difficult enough to teach, but in a Western context, it makes it even more challenging, because in the West, we do everything as a kind of head exercise, like a debate. So it's all here, where Orthodoxy is here. And this is the phrase that I often repeat to people. His Beatitude said, when you teach theology and it's separated from our ascetical tradition and practice in Orthodoxy, theology quickly becomes a weapon. So he said it's impossible to teach Orthodox theology apart from the ascetical exercises and tradition. And for me, that sums up exactly the kind of model that I want to see here.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know, the other thing, since we've got a few moments, is I talked about the academic and the pastoral side of blending things here. There's a third leg now, which is equal to the other two, which is spiritual formation.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a full-time spiritual formation director. We, again, were the only Orthodox seminary chosen by the Templeton Foundation for a study on the impact of spiritual formation and a clergyman's character. Now, that's embarrassing, because why was Templeton interested? Well, all the clergy scandal.
Yeah.
So we've made that an integral part of the experience here. Um, we don't want people losing their Hezekiah. They've got to have that as a kind of anchor for their life here.
Yeah.
So we have a proto-singleist monastic as the spiritual formation director here.
Oh, thanks to God. Yeah, that was I had, there was a thought that went through my mind was that in the new, St. Vladimir's 2.0 or whatever it is, I don't know that if there'd be room for a monastery, a full monastery, but at least
There has to be something for our monastic students because you've seen we have a significant number of
Yeah,
monastic
yeah.
students here, both men and women.
yeah,
So again, as I'm conscious that married people live differently, single students live differently than they did a decade ago.
yeah,
So we have to provide also for that monastic presence.
yeah,
Good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
yeah, yeah. Well, you've got a lot of pans in the fire.
Yes, yes. Well, this was good. And I appreciate what you're doing here.
Thank you,
So-
thank you. Well, I hope we can do it again.